Good evening, fight fans. Jack Slack here, coming at you at 5 p.m. on Monday the 10th of October. Rather well rested from this weekend, because in protest I did not stay up to watch the Bisping versus Hendo fight. I watched it on Monday morning. It was decent, can't complain. It's exactly what you expected. Dan Henderson threw his right hand a lot. Michael Bisping jabbed at him, occasionally got lazy and got clipped. It's one of those ones where, because people like the storyline of Dan Henderson winning the middleweight title, they're a bit more invested in being outraged about him not winning. When frankly, if you look at it, you got the two knockdowns, but the rest of the time he was just getting punched, or outworked. And being Dan Henderson, he spent most of the third to fifth rounds with his mouth open. But a valiant performance by Henderson, I thought. And he fought like a guy who did want this to be his last fight. I mean, jury's still out. Could be like a Ric Flair style send-off, the most beautiful send-off in pro wrestling history. And then 2 weeks later he signs with TNA and comes back. So don't hold your breath just yet on a Dan Henderson retirement, because if he's still under contract with the UFC and they have to give him a fight, and he's earning $800,000 each time he fights, or wins at least, so $400,000 each time he fights, could be hard to step away from that, especially if they haven't given him a cushy Chuck Liddell, please stop getting knocked out job. But yeah, I thought that was a fun fight. The thing that I'm having at the moment is that people are now like, Jack, you said it was going to be rubbish. And I've never said that fight would be rubbish. I said it wasn't a very good fight to make. I didn't like it. And that's more part of me being a UK consumer. Part of me getting free tickets to these UK events and feeling really disappointed when they're on at 6 a.m. But mainly it was about the title stuff. And we know we're in the money weight era with the Eddie Alvarez versus Conor McGregor fight and all that stuff. But with 500 fighters on the roster and however many titles, you would hope that they could keep them on a little bit stricter rota, I suppose. I mean, Michael Bisping could be back in the ring in 3 months and defending his title again, and could not hold up anything at all. But it felt cheap, because Henderson wasn't even ranked in the top 10 on the UFC's own rankings. It just felt like it was supposed to be Bisping defending his title in front of his home crowd. And that's what he did, as opposed to having Jacare or someone come over and fight Bisping in front of his home crowd, which is a good deal more dangerous. I think the win probably, it hurts Bisping a little bit, because I don't think any of us, this could be absolutely wrong, because that's the reason we have the fights in the first place. But I would say that most of us, if you imagined if you imagined Henderson versus Weidman, Rockhold, Romero, and Jacare, he probably gets brutally stopped in all of those, in your head at least. Bisping, not a great finisher, aside from that one stunning knockout against Luke Rockhold, which came on top of a beautiful performance generally. But aside from that, not a big puncher. Not known to finish guys, at least not super upper echelon guys. Always overwhelmed the sort of lower level guys. So yeah, I don't know this. Well, it does hurt his image, to be honest, because I said it last week. Nobody has any business being hit by Dan Henderson's right hand. Having said that, it was a little bit more complicated than that, because the game plan for Dan Henderson and Anderson Silva are pretty similar. I mean, you'll get the people saying, "Oh my God, Anderson Silva's striking is on another level from Dan Henderson." But the danger is exactly the same. If you step in with a strike and they swing back, doesn't matter if it's a picture-perfect left hook or a right hand that's just swung like a baseball bat. You get caught by either of them, you're in trouble. So the idea on Bisping's part was to keep feinting, draw Dan out, because winging massive shots like that, for guys like Anderson Silva, the feints really made him think twice, because he doesn't like looking silly. He likes making other people look silly. But when you're dealing with a guy like Mark Hunt or Dan Henderson, who they're winding up and waiting for you to step in, you show them a few feints and they're going to start, firstly, tiring themselves, flinching, missing, swinging those big bombs and missing. But they'll just start trying to sit back a bit, take the finger off the trigger, wait a little bit longer. And if you're waiting longer before you, so that you can try and identify whether a technique is real or not, a feint or a legitimate strike, you yourself are artificially shortening the window in which you get to react. That was the plan, but there's a lot of, it's not a foolproof plan by any means. Bisping would start feinting, Dan would start falling for it. And then Dan would decide he wanted to throw a right hand, and Bisping would still think that Dan was going into his shell or holding back. And then he'd step in with the feint and then go for the real punch, and Dan Henderson would still be on his stance and throw the right hand and jack Bisping's head around. Bisping, great use of the left high kick. Obviously not a power kicker in the sense that Vitor Belfort was, but fighting out of that orthodox stance, he connected a few on Dan's head around the guard. But mainly it was useful for standing Henderson up, because Henderson really likes to crouch down low on his right side behind his left shoulder. Almost like they used to say that Jim Jeffries fought, and then swing in the overhand. Yeah, he did a really nice job. Just there was a period in the fourth round where Henderson kept trying to crouch down on that side, and Bisping kept throwing the left high kick or front kick to the face almost. And none of them connected, but every single one of them took Dan up into or out of his stance and made him circle a bit. And that was the greatest strength of Bisping's game plan. He kept Henderson moving. There were long periods where Henderson was moving along the fence, and he looked a bit like a rag in the breeze. You know, his mouth was open and he was desperately breathing, and because that's something that Bisping, Bisping's probably not knocking out Dan Henderson because he doesn't want to stay in there long enough to trade right hands and left hooks and things. But something he can do that a lot of other fighters can't is keep the pace incredibly high and tire Henderson out. There was a takedown from Dan Henderson in the last round, which was pretty cool because Dan Henderson very rarely takes people down. This has been something that's like throughout his entire career. Dan Henderson has been astonishingly easy to take down, mainly when he's busy swinging for the head. When he was fighting guys like, Pelhares to a certain degree. But if he knew the guy was going to just try and take him down, he was absolutely fine. You know, he had that Olympic wrestling pedigree. But if he was in a fight with someone, he'd just neglect his takedown defense altogether and start swinging. His fight with Ninja Hua is a fantastic one for that. Ninja's hitting all these trips from the clinch, and you're thinking, why is this random dude from Curitiba, who was never like a top tier fighter, able to throw around Dan Henderson, the Olympic competitor? Certainly interesting in regard to this event was like the last stand of the TRT bros. It was Dan Henderson and Vitor Belfort. And it sort of drew to a close that really strange era in mixed martial arts. I don't know if you guys have been seeing this, but a lot of athletes now, track and field athletes and things like that, TUEs, therapeutic use exemptions, are becoming huge news in other sports. And we've been having to deal with them for years. My testosterone is low. Can I please jack up my testosterone with this artificial testosterone or whatever? Or the Mayweather one, which was quite strange, where he got a retroactive TUE for a illegal IV. I mean, it was just a weight cutting thing, probably, But yeah, Belfort had the testosterone replacement therapy, and so did Henderson, and I believe Chael Sonnen was on it for a while, and Frank Mir and Bigfoot. You'll notice a lot of these guys just aren't around anymore, and there's a lot of backlash against those guys for using TRT. But I think I'd prefer it to be this way than for them to be having successful careers, because the idea was that they needed this to compete. I think it might have been Sonnen who was saying that he literally couldn't compete without this, as the argument for keeping it. So I suppose it's encouraging that these guys are now losing, because if they were just fighters who could hang in the top 10 or whatever and still using TRT, then you'd be questioning the legitimacy of that. But Belfort was always the contentious one, because he had already failed the drug test in the past. I mean, if you look at him back in the in the pre-USADA days, and especially in the dark days of the UFC, capped delts, bro. No, he just looks like Superman. And I mean, I like Vitor, but he did cheat, and he got caught cheating, and performance-enhancing drug use can be linked to lower testosterone later in life. So the thought was always that he was getting this therapeutic use exemption for TRT, having done that to himself by cheating earlier. Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to weigh in on it, because it was such a... it's so sad to say this now, but it was such a crazy time, that TRT era. But Belfort fought Mousasi, who is incredibly hit and miss generally. I say this every time, but he's one of the most talented fighters I've seen in the light heavyweight division. He can do almost everything, but he just sometimes turns up and isn't really up for it. So he had sort of a conservative first round because, where Weidman went wild and had a little trade with Vitor and then took him down and mounted him, and Jacare mounted him in the first round, Mousasi stood back for a little bit. And then in the second round, throws up the head kick, wobbles Vitor, rushes in with this flurry. Really accurate work along the fence, which was nice. Vitor's head movement wasn't great, but it was nice to see Mousasi being so active and aggressive, which he usually isn't, but keeping his same accuracy. So yeah, it goes to the ground. Mousasi did a really cool guard pass, which was sort of like when you get the near knee through, and then he just kicked back to the other leg and brought it through to mount. And I was looking at it going, that's super cool. Now I need to try that now I need to work out why that wouldn't work on someone who hadn't just been hit in the head really hard. And then it was Vitor stuck underneath. It's just been the story of the last three. And I remember back in the day I was saying I really want to see Vitor in against a strong wrestler, a Sonnen or someone like that. The closest thing he had was Akiyama for a little while, and Akiyama, he just wanted to stand and bang, and he got laid out as a result. Oh, that was the one where Vitor basically hammer-fisted him he punched him in the back of the head, like on the ground. He's in the sprawl position. He just starts punching down on the back of his head. Yeah, Vitor has been a pretty big offender on that. So's Dan Henderson, actually. If you watch the second Shogun knockout, he realizes the ref's behind him, and he just brings these hammer fists from above his head down on the back of Shogun's head. Brutal. But yeah, I said it in my article. It used to be that Vitor had like a window in which he'd explode on you, and then after that he'd sort of lose confidence, and he had a problem with tiring, but more importantly, he had this sort of heart sort of problem getting motivated to continue the fight if he couldn't knock the guy out. And that's when you saw all these weird performances where he jumped guard. Did that to Sakuraba, did it to John Jones very famously, did it to Overeem, and then he did it to Jacare, which was the strangest move I've seen. He pulled guard on the best guard passer, not just in the light heavyweight division, but maybe in MMA ever. But that window in which he's super dangerous has just shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. So it was about 30 seconds he was dangerous against Weidman. And then he just, it was like all the air left his body. It was like the Shane Carwin adrenaline dump. And then he fought Henderson, and nothing really happened for the first sort of minute, and he scored the head kick and knocked him out. But he wasn't ever like pushed, and certainly he hadn't thrown his best against Henderson and realised it hadn't worked. And then this one against Mousasi, it was like 2 punches, his window in which he was super dangerous, and then he was on the defensive the entire time. So Henderson, I mean, we're hopefully not going to see Henderson again. And I don't mean that in a being a dick way. I mean that partly I'm bored of writing articles about the one punch that he has. But also you just don't want, he'd been getting knocked out more and more regularly. It used to be that he'd drop these decisions to younger, fitter guys who could go the distance, and he couldn't. But it was getting to the point where between the 2 Vitor losses and the Mousasi loss, he was just getting beaten up, and it wasn't good to see. And I'd like to see Belfort probably step away now too, because he had a great career. He won his UFC title and he made a ton of money, so he could quite happily retire, I imagine. It's that competitive spirit. I don't know if that'll ever leave until it's like savagely beaten out of someone. I had a lot of people saying to me afterwards, oh, you said it would be a rubbish fight, and to be honest, I didn't enjoy it that much for the reasons that I stated before. But I just. You can't be mad at someone for not enjoying the same fight as you. And I'm big on this. I've always been big on this. I don't believe in shaming people for liking violent fights. I don't believe in shaming people for not liking technical fights. And it goes the other way. If you don't care about like the barn burner between Michael Bisping and Dan Henderson, or you don't care about seeing Dan Henderson do well in 2 rounds and then gas, you shouldn't be feeling bad about that. What excites you, and what doesn't. This isn't all one thing. There's a lot of different fights out there. They're almost different genres. So I don't worry about what other people find entertaining, and definitely don't get angry for people not finding something entertaining. It's just not worth it. If you want to watch a Lewis Smolka versus Patrick Houlihan, it's wonderful if you can share that with someone and they enjoy it. But if they don't enjoy it, don't be a dick about it, So what else was on that card? Oh, Jimmy Manuwa looked great, I thought. Stan was on commentary for that one, and he was pointing out that it was a bit weird that Mano was going to the clinch so much in the first round. But looking back at it, I was thinking this midway through the first round. I was thinking maybe he's just trying to stay out of the way of those long left kicks. And Ovince St. Preux is so well known for fading. He threw about 3 punches in the John Jones fight that meant anything, and they were like quite scary. But the rest of the time, he was just breathing through his mouth and trying to survive. But St. Preux has a habit of gassing. He's a huge guy at that weight, and he's a big muscular guy too. So could well be cutting the weight drains him. Could well be the muscle mass, as Goldie and Rogan always go on about. But he struggles, and not being like a classically trained wrestler. He's a former NFL player, so he's enormously athletic. Former American football player, sorry, not the NFL. Didn't make it that far, which is no shame, but not the most technical wrestler. He's strong in the clinch, but it sort of fades as he goes on. So I think maybe the plan was to have Mano move him to the clinch and just tire him out a bit. There was a really nice knee in the clinch to the body, made a great sound, and got a good rise out of the crowd. But second round was completely different. It was like as soon as Mano saw St. Preux breathing through his mouth, starts moving in, starts hitting the body, decks him with a beautiful overhand, which was interesting for me because I think Jimmy Mano is left-handed. He certainly fights like he's left-handed. He's all left hooks. And he's really good at mixing up the left hook to the body and the left hook to the head. Just that double attack. And I was surprised by the overhand right, and clearly so was Ovince St. Preux. And then the lovely left hook just put him in the stanky leg position. Those are rough, those ones. Because as scared as we are about CTE, it's sort of nebulous, and the results of it are off in the future, when you can't remember your kids' names when you're 70 or something like that. Or you go colourblind when you're 65. But when you see a guy fall on his ankle like that, you just think, oh, I hope he didn't just break his ACL as well or something like that. Stefan Struve gets big marks for entertaining grappling. He looks like he's been... I heard he was working with Semi Schilt at some point in the past. It's not just me. There must be people there all the time going, you look a lot like Semi Schilt. Why do you not fight like Semi Schilt? So he wasn't using the lead leg front kicks and the snapping jab and stuff, but he was using the back leg front snap kicks to the body, which were quite cool. He has a tendency to sort of reach down at the guy's head when the guy moves in, so he's vulnerable to the overhands and the swinging left hooks. That was something Schilt also found, but Schilt was quite good at getting a hold of the head and going for the double collar tie. Struve hit a nice knee from the double collar tie in this one. First round, he does some amazing grappling on the ground. He's so smooth for a giant. He's smooth for a heavyweight, generally. I mean, I remember watching him... was it Sean McCorkle took him down and he swept him or something like that? But he's always had a really good guard. In fact, Semi Schilt had a very good guard for a big man back in the day. He started out in MMA, was a king of pancrase at one point. But yeah, very good with triangles and stuff like that. So Struve was all over Daniel... I can't say his name. Danny O. He was all over Danny O. And kept hitting this slick uchimata from... an overhook. I suppose if you're that tall, you can raise their legs so high when you do that uchimata that you're pretty much guaranteed to get them over eventually. That's what they said about, was it Leo Santos? Famous butterfly guard player in BJJ. A really tall guy, which isn't very usual for the butterfly guard. Normally sort of the territory of the stocky guys. And it's certainly something that's sort of contained within weight classes, except for guys like Marcelo Garcia, who can do it to giants. But Santos could... His limbs were so long that he could have the guy going into like a headstand before he swept him, or a cartwheel. I was just thinking while I was watching this, I would love to see Stefan Struve like take a serious run at grappling. BJJ, no-gi, whatever, because he's really smooth for a heavyweight, and he could probably give a lot of guys trouble with his size alone. If you add in the fact that he's a very technical giant, he could probably do some good things. So he hits the uchimata in the second round, takes down Danny O. Danny O pulls him over top for a half-guard sweep. Struve clears his knee of the head, going into what some guys call the deep half-guard killer. It's just sort of sitting on top of him, and then as Danny O comes up, he grabs the front headlock and then rolls on his side to get the DARS. And Danny O walks all along the fence, but still ends up in the DARS, and it was really slick. Stefan Struve's a cool guy on Twitter, but I do rag on him for his striking all the time. But just watching that, I was like, please, just get to the clinch now. Just keep taking guys down or jumping guard on them. It'd be even more entertaining. Obviously, Overeem beat him up from the guard, but like it's really fun to see him grapple. Other decent performances, Yuri Alcantara. God, that elbow was loud. Spinning back elbow on Brad Pickett. Poor old Brad Pickett. He's like, that's his 7th loss in 11 UFC fights. And I think they keep him around because he's English. But you've got to remember, he did have that amazing performance against Demetrius Johnson. I think he was the last guy to beat... Oh, no, sorry. Obviously, Dominic Cruz beat him. Yeah, he's just sort of fallen off a bit in recent years. And some of them, it seems like he just can't get going. Like, he's got a game plan he wants to use, but he's just doesn't ever get into it. Like that rough one against Thomas Almeida. And he landed some good left hooks in that fight, too. His left hook is, of course, the famous one punch. But he just needs... I don't know what he needs, but he needs an injection of, like, some variety. Yeah. What else was good? I like Leon Edwards versus Tumenov. I was really excited for Tumenov in this fight, but then while I was watching it, I was like, wow, Edwards looks really good. He did a little reverse toe-holdy thing while he passed at one point, which was quite cool. The old catch wrestling style far ankle from side control, where you pull it up, like Gomi did in that submission tournament, where you pull their ankle up towards their head from the outside. Really neat little thing. Jakesi versus Sajewski. That was a hard one to really be excited for because is it Sajewski? I can't say his name, but he was a late replacement and he did not look in shape for this at all. Jakesi, Mark Jakesi, the hotly touted striker, gave up position a lot, gave up clinches and things like that. And you get being exciting in front of your home crowd, but you know that's the sort of thing that will not fly against top level guys, or at least he'll have to try and keep a measure on it. But fun stuff nonetheless, and he did have some slick little combinations and setups. Mike Perry versus Danny Roberts. That was a really interesting one. Mike Perry was eating those punches. He's moving forward with his hands down and his head up. And Danny Roberts has... he throws the left hand and he leans with it. And he never really recovers from it properly. He doesn't close the door. You know, we're always talking about that. But he leans well ahead of himself. And so what was happening was he was beating Platinum Mike to the punch time and time again. But every time that Mike could force him to lean or miss or fall short, he'd immediately counter him because he was just there. His head was forward of his hips and he couldn't recover. And the danger of doing that, always finishing with your rear hand and not recovering, especially when you're reaching for it, is that the guy can take the punch on the face and he could throw back punches blind and he knows where your head is, which was what happened a fair few times. Really nice knee from the clinch in that one, hurt Danny Roberts too. I thought Mike Perry looked very crisp. I mean, as much as everyone wants to hate him, I kind of want to hate him because he does come across as like a bit of a knob in his interviews. But you know, he looked really good in that. I thought in moments of it. I mean, he also looked quite defensively porous, quite hittable, but he didn't seem to care. And then Leonardo Santos versus Adriano Martins. I would advise that you never watch that because it was just dreck. It was two guys, Southpaw versus Orthodox, and this is the stuff that promoters used to be terrified of back in the day in boxing when they wouldn't promote Southpaws because they didn't want these kind of matchups. It was just two guys tapping each other's lead hands and then occasionally throwing a low kick, and then the other one would throw a low kick, and it was so boring. And obviously, you know, you can't rag on the dudes for putting on a boring fight. They're both trying to win. They're not trying to put on a fight. But one of them needed to change something up, and neither of them did. So that was bad. So that was all those fights done. God, I talked about that for like half an hour. I hope that wasn't really boring. Let's do some questions. Hi Jack, thanks for the episodes. I listen to them every week, usually more than once. I have many questions for you, but I will restrict myself to this one. With the upcoming Bisping versus Hendo fight, okay, this was sent last week, sorry guys, the UFC have made a lot of promotional material about Bisping in particular. On one occasion, he says he knew that he could beat Anderson Silva because his style of fighting was the worst matchup for him. My question is, do you think this is correct? And if so, would Bisping have beaten Silva in his prime? Not trying to throw shade, but I probably am. Sorry, Bisping. And that's from Hjötor. I hope that's how you say that name. One of my Viking people, my Viking fans. Yeah, I said this a while ago. I always thought that Bisping was quite an interesting stylistic matchup. I mean, he could have got laid out, like, because he has a problem with getting hit. But he does throw feints all the time. You can watch this in even his oldest fights. He throws a lot of feints. He throws a lot of non-committal 1-2s. And and he's just a tricky guy to counter unless he makes a mistake on his part. He's not going to run face first at Anderson Silva like Forrest Griffin, Chael Sonnen, and all those guys who gave him that reputation for being an amazing counter-striker did. I think, it still would have been a hard time for Bisping, but, everyone's ragging on Anderson Silva's record at the moment and saying, he dropped off a cliff, but he's fighting stylistically horrible matchups for him. Chris Weidman was a better offensive boxer than anyone he'd ever met, and really did well pressuring him and staying on top of his feet and never overcommitting or showing his chin. Nick Diaz is almost unknockoutable, and another pressure fighter. Not great footwork, but it just keeps coming forward. And obviously Silva felt like he needed to get the win because he'd had so much trouble in the last two. Bisping throws feints all the time. Well, doesn't throw feints, shows feints all the time. Very non-committal striking. And he was doing lovely work from behind the inside low kick and the low-line side kick across to the other knee, which I thought was really nice. Oh, no, sorry, that was against Henderson. He was doing it across the other knee. Silva was fighting southpaw, so he was going to the knee in front of him. But the low-line side kick was slick in that fight too. And then when Silva did that, usual bollocks on the fence, rather than running in like Stephan Bonner or someone like that, Bisping showed him feints, got him leaning, and hit him in the body, which was really nice. And then, of course, Silva's most recent fight was Daniel Cormier, who is a guy who has a good few pounds on him, fought at heavyweight, is a world-class wrestler, and can take him down quite easily. So, it's not so much Silva's fallen off a cliff. I mean, he's older, yeah, but those guys were all really tough matchups when you compare them to someone like Yushin Okami or Chael Sonnen or, whoever he'd been fighting for the years before that. It was one of those interesting cases where the guy maybe can't get the wins together over guys who are going to go on to fight Silva, but might have done a better job than those guys who went on to fight Silva. Because this is a game, and this is linking back to that moaning about matchups earlier. The title is, the only way it can work is if you're rewarding consistency, because I promise you, there are guys, if I found the 100 light heavyweights, top 100 light heavyweights in the world, if I put in number 85 with John Jones or Daniel Cormier, they might stand a better chance of beating him than someone they've seen 100 times before. Or they could just have a really goofy style and match up really well. So what you do with the title is you reward consistency. For the idiots, you're saying, yes, this guy can beat everyone in the world. But for the guy who's seen thousands of fights, they know that it's just a matter of time until they lose. You can say whenever a guy loses, oh, he's just getting old now. Or you can say okay, well, that is quite interesting how his style matched up there. Yeah, so I don't know if Bisping would have won, but certainly he would have always been more interesting than a few of the guys that Silva fought. In fact, I think it would have been one of the most interesting matchups Silva could have had. I just don't think that anyone would have taken it seriously at the time, because Bisping, for a long time, they kept him not really fighting top-level competition, and then when he finally did, he would lose. It was only really on that recent run where he was fighting Talas Leites and Anderson Silva that he looked really good. Dear Mr. Slack, big fan, and honestly, analysts like you, Luke Thomas, and Firas Zahabi have changed the way I look at fighting. This is likely a common question, but I have been inspired to write and contribute to the art of fighting myself. Where the hell would I even start if I wanted to become a writer such as yourself? I have very little college or formal education, but I like to imagine that I have a fairly keen eye for breaking down fights. Any advice or help would place me forever in your debt. Oh, don't promise that. Thank you, sir, from Jordan. My first and most important piece of advice to anyone who wants to start on a career in writing anything is just to start. I've spoken to guys who've come through journalism courses and things like that, and they teach you a lot of stuff like shorthand, which no one really needs anymore because we have film of everything that we do, like interviews and stuff. Not shitting on journalism degrees, but a lot of them start you doing a blog right away because it's important to have that body of work for when you were studying, which is kind of that's kind of damning that people look at your CV and they go, okay, journalism degree, did you do anything in that time? But yeah, having a body of work is so important, and the first stuff might be shit. I know I look back at a lot of my stuff and I go, God, that was shit. In terms of writing, I mean, the content was always fairly the same, but I had no idea what I was doing writing. And the best advice I got, actually, I'm going to give a shout out to Mike Chiappetta, because I emailed him, I think I messaged him on the UG or something like that. I just said, I'd really like to make a go of this, give me some help, please. And he had no reason to reply to me. I had written like 2 articles total. I had probably about 200 views to rub together. And he just sent back, make sure you're reading good writers. Don't read MMA writers or things like that. And that's what I did. I went out and I got Hemingway, Mailer, people like that. Read as much of that shit as I could. Truman Capote. I've got a real thing for new journalism, because it's fancy fiction writing applied to non-fiction subjects, and that's what I like. So I went and found as many good writers as I could, and what I did was I did exactly what I did with, or what I do with fighters. I examined what they do, line to line, stanza to stanza, and common themes you notice, and you just try and build yourself up from there. And I wouldn't worry too much about like creating your style. Your style will come naturally. Some days you'll write something and you won't have time to edit it, and people will say, that's the best thing I've ever read of yours. And then other days that just won't cut it, and people go, God, this is riddled with bollocks and it reads really clunkily. And then, to be honest, I like the days when I can go back through my work and cut it down as much as possible. I think it was Hemingway said you had to kill your darlings. And that just means if it isn't serving its purpose, chop it out. Doesn't matter how good you thought it was when you wrote it. Just get rid of it. And I quite enjoy that. I quite enjoy the killing of darlings. I quite like saying, this is going to be my self-imposed word count. This is how many over I am. Let's see how much of this I can get out. And I feel like pieces come together a lot better if you do that. I mean, this is not going to be news to anyone who's done journalism or anything like that. As far as examining fights, training helps a lot. I mean, I only got into this because I was training and working on my own stuff, and I made little technical studies to try and pick up stuff from fighters. And somehow that became like a writing gig, even though I could barely write at the time. I mean, I've always wanted to write like a exhaustive list of things you should be looking for, but a lot of it is just exposure to it, knowing like what happens usually, what's unusual, where a fight's usually won and lost. And a lot of your own analysis will be coloured by your own, God, I hate saying this, filter, your own helio filter. I know I find a lot of karate style stuff in fights that maybe someone who is more of a Muay Thai stylist wouldn't. Or I look a lot more for head positioning in the clinch, where a lot of other guys would be looking at their pummeling and their footwork and stuff like that. Obviously you can't write about everything that ever happens in a fight. It's just impossible. But your eye's drawn to certain things, and a lot of that is to do with the influences on you. Really, everyone's writing style is writing style, fighting style, anything. Everyone's style in anything is a product of their influences, the things around them, the things that they've experienced and read and seen. And that doesn't mean that you'll come out looking like your coaches or your teachers, but what they have said to you will somehow affect what you write, even if it's like rebelling against that. So the most important thing is just to read lots, write lots, watch lots of fights, train if you can, and go for it. Dear Jack, I have been a fan of your work for years. I have a lot of questions to ask, but I'm going to keep it to my 2 most recent. On a previous podcast, you spoke a little bit about Brendan Ingle's footwork training. I wanted to know if you had any leads or some source material for this. I'll answer that first. Yeah, Brendan Ingle patented the lines that he's drawn down his gym, so it's all a little bit secretive. You'd have to ask someone who's actually trained there. I would love to train there someday, but it's a little way to go to get training. But basically, I know that there's a lot of circling and straight line movement and a lot of stance switching. I don't know if they do the sort of like classical sidestep to pivot in behind, which is one of my favourite stance switches. But certainly they practice their footwork religiously out of both stances. Second question, more off topic. Do or have you ever watched anime? And if so, have you ever seen Hajime no Ippo? It's a show about boxing, and it's good with technique and strategy breakdowns, though dramatized for effect. Keep up all the good work, and looking forward to more material in future. P.S. Yes, I am actually writing this to you from my work desk right now. LOL. And then there's a massive logo for their company from Declan. Yeah, I mean, I've watched a little bit of anime. I wouldn't call myself a weeaboo, but I'm a massive Studio Ghibli is the correct way to say it, apparently. But I learned that at the museum. I love Studio Ghibli. I'm a huge fan of all their work. It's just magical and childlike, but also in a way that an adult can appreciate. I always liked Miyazaki's stuff because he always believed that they shouldn't be an outright villain. Everyone should have their own motivation and things like that. And that's just the sort of stuff that you don't really get in a lot of animated cartoons. There's a lot of good guy, bad guy stuff. And even in, supposedly grown-up films, everything's very simple. But Miyazaki's stuff is always a little bit more complicated, and I like that. It's how you create a living world that people can appreciate. And also just all the weird stuff like the cat bus and things like that. If you do get the chance to go to that museum, go to it. It's absolutely wonderful. Yes, I've seen a couple of episodes of Hajime no Ippo. It's good fun. I quite enjoyed it. It's one of those ones that I can't really do episodic anime. I've only really... Actually, I say that. I really enjoyed Attack on Titan because one of my friends said, you have to watch this. And I went, and then I watched it and I was blown away by it. But generally, this is the complaint people always have about Dragon Ball Z, which I've never watched, but they always say that it takes the whole episode for anything to happen. And I always felt like Hajime no Ippo was a little bit like that. But there are some good references to Jack Dempsey and Floyd Patterson and people like that in it. So it's good fun. It's just not Studio Ghibli. That's the problem. Hi, Jack. Recently you talked about gloves in MMA. But what do you think about fighters being required to wear a gi or something similar? I would like the idea due to many new techniques it opens up. Plus, it more realistically represents an actual fight, unless you're at the beach or something. What do you think? Cheers, from Lewis. I think they have a thing called Kudo, which is like a MMA sort of thing in a gi. You're talking to someone who loathes training in the gi and loves no gi. Largely just because of the speed difference and not having to worry about hands in your collar and gripping the gi pants from De La Riva and stuff like that. Just all those things that slow stuff down. And I say that as someone who in the gi does all those things to slow stuff down. One of the things that's always been interesting is we're giving guys the choice to compete in the gi. I'm not a huge fan of making everyone wear a gi. Gi grips are a huge deal even in striking. I did some stuff on this in fighting karate, one of the little studies we put together. But it's Sabaki method, Ashihara style karate stuff, where if you can grip the gi at the back of the tricep, as you could get if you parried a straight blow, you can grip the back of the tricep rather. You can stiff arm the opponent away and start throwing round kicks with your back leg at them, or punching them, and they can't turn all. You can control their ability to spin all the way around, and you can keep them facing away from you. Very, very powerful grip, very useful in point karate and some forms of knockdown karate where they sort of allow gi grabbing, or they don't really notice if you do it quickly. But you will also see Marcelo Garcia doing that. When he stiff arms the opponent's arm away to get up from underneath side control. Josh Barnett does this as well. But if you can grab a big clump of gi there too, you're even stronger because they're locked in place. They can't just snatch their arm back when you push it away. I used to like Hidehiko Yoshida turning up in the gi. Gave him a bit more friction in the clinches so that he could grab a hold of guys and they wouldn't just wriggle free. But he also was a master at can't remember what it's called in judo, Sore Guruma something, or Sore Gatame. I don't know. But the Ezekiel choke, where you put your hand 4 fingers deep into your own sleeve, and then the other hand goes across the neck. And there's a few more subtleties to it than that. You've got to get the thing that I always forget is to get the actual gi that you're gripping, your sleeve, right up to their neck and try and get the arm down the other side. I always end up doing it just like I'm trying to pull my own hand down on their neck. But he was really good at that. I think he neck cranked Kiyoshi Tamura. I think that was a gi grip too. But yeah, he was really good at that. He caught Hoist Gracie from Mount with that. And it was one of those Gracie stoppages where the referee stopped it thinking that Hoist was going unconscious. Hoist stood up and was like, "No, I didn't." And you never know what to believe. But certainly he was locking it in on Hoist, which was quite cool. I saw a really cool one in a grappling competition between Henna Gracie and Jason Miller, he of Mayhem fame. Mayhem was no gi and Henna was wearing the gi. And he was in guard and he passed his own lapel over the back of Miller's head. and then brought it down on the other side to make basically make lapels for Miller, and then cross-choked him on it. Very cool. I mean, the gi opens up a lot of different chokes, but it also sort of cheapens the game because you can attempt them from anywhere. We've all been under that guy who sits in closed guard trying to Ezekiel you, and you're just going, no, that's not happening. And then they'll just keep trying it. Because it's a fairly conservative move. You can just chill there. I think it's Sebastian Broche did it to the Meows. Well, one of the Meows obviously didn't fight both of them at once. Just put in the Ezekiel and started standing up from guard, just so that the Meow would have to deal with something, as opposed to just standing up in Meow's guard and letting him grab a hold of the leg or go for the De La Riva or something like that. I'll tell you what I'd love to see in MMA, because it was always the case that it was a guy in a gi versus a guy who wasn't like super keen on using that other guy's gi. It would be really interesting to see someone like get a Bravo grip from side control and just pound the shit out of his opponent. Collar across the back and things like that. There are also some really cool gi methods to use the opponent's lapel to trap their arm. There was a nice arm trap going on last night at the event. The other night, at the event. Someone managed to pass the opponent's arm under their back and control it underneath. That's a really powerful technique. Mario Sperry used to be great at that. The old one-armed man. That's how, I think it was Chris Hordecki, when he was like a rising superstar in IFL and they were like, this kid's the future. Some guy just trapped his arm behind his back and pounded him in the face until he was unconscious. And of course, guard passing could either be more interesting or more boring, because you've got the gi pant grips, which make passing easier, but then you've got all the spider guard and shit that stems off that, and that makes it a lot slower. So, it's a toss-up. It's always interesting to ask, like, if we added this rule, would it make it look more like that martial art that does train with that, or would it take on its own new thing altogether? Anyway, I've prattled on for a while now. There isn't a fight next week, an important one at any rate, I don't think. I don't think there's a Bellator event on either. That's not me saying Bellator is not important, sorry, that I meant there's no UFC card. I don't think there's a Bellator one either. Oh god, Justin Gaethje's fight was cancelled. That ruined my weekend. Yeah, nothing for a while now. No UFC show until November 5th. No Bellator until October 21st. So we'll have to think of some interesting things to talk about between now and then. I'll need lots of your mail. Please send all your questions to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. If you haven't signed up to the Patreon, definitely do. We've got the history episode online. That's about James Figg and Jack Broughton, about the very early development of the rules of fighting, the London prize ring. Lots of stuff about bare knuckle, which everyone seems to be asking me about at the moment. So if you want to know more about that and how it affected fighting, get down there, have a watch of that. And next week, maybe we'll talk about some kickboxing or maybe some old fights. There'll probably be some anniversaries. It was the anniversary of the Thriller in Manila the other day. Well, give me a shout and let me know what you fancy talking about in those couple of weeks until we've got something interesting happening. Oh no, it's only really next week we have to worry about. So yeah, give me a shout on what you want to talk about. Sign up to the Patreon, subscribe to the YouTube, and I'll catch you next week. I'm Jack Slack. This has been the Fights Gone By podcast. Cheers.